Hello, hi. It's really nice to be here in the lab. I've heard so much about it, and to actually be here and see how it works and what it feels like is really important. And it's always great to get an excuse to come to Coventry, because you have really brilliant incidental public art that kind of catches you by surprise, like some strange tile formation somewhere that's half falling apart on the bridge just before you come into the university. It's really, I love just walking around going, so it's very exciting. And it's also really exciting to be here and hear about your plans for your City of Culture, which I think will be amazing. So I'm just going to talk you through what I do, part of what I do at Watershed, which is a place in Bristol, and then take you through some specific Playable City projects that we've worked on over the last 5 or 6 years. So this is us. Watershed describes itself as a digital creativity centre. The building itself is about 40 years old, and then within that we have a place called the Pervasive Media Studio. And that is about 10 years old, and the Pervasive Media Studio is a place where research into arts and technology meet. So basically, we are a group of researchers. The Digital Cultures Research Centre in UWE, the University of West of England, is based there, and a mixture of what we call residents. So they are artists, product designers, they can be theatre makers or VR designers or any art form basically that exists kind of comes to the studio. And usually people come to us with a question. So they're usually at a point in their career where they're experimenting with technology, or they've been using technology for a while and they want to experiment with theatre or a different art form. So there's always a question. You don't pay to be part of our studio, we gift you space. But we do ask you that you follow 2 rules that we have. And those rules are generosity and interruptibility. And what that creates is a culture of questioning and nobody being the expert. Because we actually think that although people have skills or experience in a certain area, we're all experts in how technology works in our lives in the world. And so we mix people together. We do things like everyone has to change desks every 6 months, which of course we all protest at because it's a pain in the arse. But once we do it, we realise, oh, I haven't spoken to this person before, I haven't spoken to this person before. And so the kind of things we do as well is we offer formal residencies to people where we pay them money to maybe look at an idea, or we bring in a magician in residence to work with some of our interface designers to make them think completely differently and beyond the limits of what's possible to think of what could be possible. And so that kind of explains some of the thoughts that went into creating Playable City. And Playable City is, just checking, Playable City is a project that started-ish around 5 or 6 years ago. And it came out of us in the studio looking at sort of smart city visions of the future. So 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of big companies who have changed their sort of way they speak about cities now were bringing out these really beautiful, sexy, gorgeous videos of how we all should behave in cities. And we would just arrive at our hotel off the airplane, and we would just wave our phone at someone, and it would all work perfectly. And we would end up in these beautiful spaces, which all looked the same no matter where you were. And we were slightly horrified at this vision, because what we actually saw was an idea being sold that didn't really reflect what we loved about cities, and what we loved about technology in cities, which was, am I rattling? Yeah, sorry, that'd be annoying. And so we were looking at the artists around us, making interesting things like sound walks and using technology to connect people to each other in cities. And we thought, hang on a minute, there's something here. So we wanted to create something that was a sort of a counterpoint to this smart city narrative. And the language that was being used as well with smart cities was very, well, you don't understand, so you catch up, but we're going to do the real big boy business here. And we were very much appalled by that attitude, which still kind of prevails today with a lot of big technology companies. And And so we created a thing called the Playable City Award. And the Playable City Award was a commission for a creative from any background to create a piece of work for the city, which had a couple of conditions. The first condition was it had to be have a low barrier to entry, so anyone could use it. You didn't have to, at the time, own a £600 smartphone or know how VR works or any of those things that stop us from taking part and understanding technology. We wanted to remove some of those. It had to play with infrastructure in an interesting way. So again, we didn't want people creating new sort of venues in the middle of the city for public work. And we wanted it to be something for all ages, which is really hard to do, but at least if they tried to hit a broad range of ages. Our secret code was we don't just want to make something for 25-year-old hipsters. That's what the all ages bracket was. And so we launched this award. We didn't know where it would go. It was an experiment. It was an experiment to get people to think about the city and for artists to broaden their ideas about the city. I'm going to skip that one for a second. And so the first project that we commissioned, which seems quite old now, it's an SMS project, was a project called Hello Lamppost. And Hello Lamppost, oh, she just made a video. And so a risky, quite strange project, and now we're used to tapping our phones for buying or shopping, but back then sending a text message to a post box in Bristol in the middle of the day was considered very strange. I think something like 25,000 people sent text messages to objects in Bristol in a really short period of time, just 3 weeks I think. And so we realised that there was something here. There was something that people were thinking about connecting with. And what happened then was the stories that were coming out of that were really interesting, because people were talking to these objects, having intimate conversations about how lonely they felt in parts of the city, or how their journey was going for the day, and started having conversations about how they felt to live in Bristol. And so the next project we commissioned was, I won't go through them all, but just to give you a sense of what came after Hello Lamppost. with shadowing was basically we replaced the technology inside of standard lampposts, and when you walked underneath them, it recorded your shadow and then plays it back for you. And the simple, playful invitation to do what you like with your shadow in the street unleashes all sorts of behaviours in people, for better or worse. Whatever you can do with your shadow will be done in the street. But it was nice because people started to bring their families, or they would take their dog, because the excitement of seeing your dog's shadow when he's walking through it and he doesn't really know what's happening was actually very cool for people. But what happened then was there were conversations about, well, why is this here? What is the technology doing in our city? Why is it surveilling people? What are you doing with the data? Which again, 5 years ago was still not something, it hadn't been revealed to us what Facebook was doing at that point, so it wasn't a popular conversation. But people started to have really interesting conversations about also what is the function of a lot of the infrastructure in our cities. And so Playable City started to become very popular, and other countries were interested in what we were doing as a concept, including people in smart cities companies. And so we were asked to travel to other countries around the world and bring the project to other places. But what we realized very quickly is that you can't just transplant a project from one country and put it into another country and hope for the best. Because obviously if it's public, it's in the street, if it's contextualized in a completely different way that we don't understand as foreigners coming in, then that can be really problematic. And so we wanted to try and avoid that. So what we tried to do, and we still try to do, is wherever we go, we start by asking really basic questions, like what is public space here? Because that's not actually when I think of public space immediately, here in Coventry, I think of your open squares, I think of parks. In other countries, that's very different. And so when we go abroad now, we try to build a community similar to what we do in the studio. We look for local people who are doing this kind of work, who are doing interesting things in the city, and we try and connect them to each other and develop a program with them, including some of our artists who have made Playable City work before, and get them to work together and prototype ideas about what their city, what technology in their city needs for them. And so I'm gonna. So we spend a lot of time in Lagos, in Nigeria, and from what we start with when we go anywhere is what we call a city workshop, which is an open workshop for anyone in the city to come along and learn about Playable City and also give us really robust feedback on the projects and what they think will work in their city. And that's always really surprising and interesting for us. And so really quickly we learned that a project like shadowing would be really inappropriate in Lagos because of people's attitudes or beliefs around shadows. And so from then we've developed, but the next stage of that was realizing that all of these cities that we were going to, so we were in Recife in Brazil, Austin, Texas, we do a lot of work in Tokyo, this is Seoul in Korea, was actually these cities learning from each other. So it wasn't just about us being a conduit for learning about Playable City, it was actually we could connect these people to each other and they could learn from each other. So this is an area called Cheongdecheon in Seoul in South Korea. And it's a really beautiful piece of a reclaimed river in the middle of the city. It's a beautiful place to walk around at night. It has beautiful light installations. But what we learned by being there for a while was this came at a big cost. This was a very big, busy road, which was very, congested and caused a lot of problems in the city, but it fed a lot of business in the city. So there were temporary shops set up all along miles and miles of road, which had just been told to clear off because of this beautiful, beautiful redesign. So we commissioned local artists to come and help us make projects that helped people talk about the process because they didn't feel like they were consulted in that. And so we had, and again, it's really important to remember the context of where we were. We had one artist pitch a graffiti project, which was about putting huge projectors along the river to project so that people could just draw. You could draw on an iPad, and it would be projected. But the graffiti culture in South Korea is very, very, very hidden and very small. It took me weeks to see a bit of graffiti on the street. So for that act, for that allowing people the voice to be able to talk about their city in that way, publicly, without editing it, was a huge step and very appropriate for that situation. Another example would be the work we've done in Tokyo. Again, Tokyo has a completely different context, and from working with partners there, what we're learning is, obviously, Tokyo has a really technologically advanced society. People use tech way more than we do. There's robots everywhere. It is kind of like the Blade Runner thing, where people are just so used to it all the time. But what is different in Tokyo is public space and relationships in public space. Tokyo is a very beautiful, manicured city. And it is actually very rude to start conversations with people in public. And so then how do you create play projects around that? And so we worked with what will now be the Olympics Committee to figure out how we could get Japanese artists and British artists to work together to like try and unlock some of that for people, or what are the symbols you use to tell people it's okay? Without giving them a big long lecture before they do something, because nobody wants to play after what being told 20 million rules. This is one of the projects that we're working on at the moment in Melbourne, Australia. Again, we're taking our time to try and figure out what is appropriate in Melbourne. What seems to be happening at the moment is, a bit like here, there's a lot of questioning about the role of privilege in art making, in public art, in society, and what that means. How do we repair, how do we not repeat? And so there's a lot of work around First Nations dialogue within the city. And I thought it was really interesting earlier when you were talking about Borneo, because a lot of the First Nations people knowledge is actually in people and is kept that way. It's not like you can read a book and learn a lot of the terminology or how to behave. So we're taking a very slow process, and we're consulting on a project which is called 64 Ways of Being, which is an augmented reality experience. We used to have a rule, no screens, but now everyone has a screen. So actually, we're trying to find ways to use that screen more imaginatively. And this will be an augmented reality project that is created by an artist called Troy Innocent. And unfortunately, I didn't get the video in time, but he's made an amazing project for Melbourne Trams, where he created an app. And once a year, Melbourne City allows people to take over their trams and paint an image all across them. And he has created an app where if you hold it in front of the phone, as the tram goes by, it'll play a specific musical score based on that. And you can then play with that, because you can speed it up, you can slow it down, depending on how you move while you're waiting for the tram. So it's a really, again, simple, quite open-ended, complex to make experience that allows people to sort of just think a little differently about where they are and what's around them. And so from that as well, we have a program called Creative Producers International, where we actually took lots of producers from lots of countries that we work in and put them together to form a formal network. So they are producers who have entirely different contexts, but who share their methodology, who share their work, and who also are in the process of visiting each other to work together in public space. So we have our producers from Mexico. I just came back from Kazakhstan, where we were doing work with people outside of the city. And so it's trying to take the gift of the business and the popularity that we have and find structures around it to make it more sustainable for people to do this in their city. What time am I? Okay, perfect, sorry. And so as we move on, Playable City now is looking at ways to be more, we know that when we work in public space, sometimes we are given nice public spaces and permission to work in those places, and we always kind of step back and go, oh, what about over there? Because everyone seems to be over here. There's 4 people here, they're very nice, but everyone's over there. So how about we work over there instead? But also what we're realizing more is that even over there, in that place that's busy and alive and hopping, some people aren't there. and that people don't feel safe in that space, or people come to that space, and to ask them to play in public is a particular ask, which isn't always inclusive or inviting, and that inviting people in doesn't always make them feel welcome. And so we're looking at ways now to work with maybe, and not to work, but that's what we're trying to figure out, is how do we include people who aren't physically there? And how do we do that in a way that works for people who aren't there to be there if they want to be? How can they connect with people who are there? And how can we do it in creative and playful ways that isn't just, oh, let's video people. And so that's our next phase, is understanding how we incorporate different layers of presence, basically, being in those public spaces. And that's me. I'm not going to talk about timeshare Facebook. And I was asked to, I'm around all day, so please come to me with questions. And take a look at the website, there's lots of projects on there that have happened over the years. And also what we do when we commission work, we have a shortlist. And we publish the shortlist because we want people to see the range of work that's out there. Because if we could, we'd commission every day. But we can't, so we're at least trying to show people what's possible. And John, will you help me out? Yes. Come up here and I'll show. Does anyone know the Danish clapping game? Great. So.
I don't.
Right, yeah, sorry, I completely didn't tell you this is going to happen.
Okay.
And yeah, we can all try this because we've got a few minutes and it's a great conference. And so basically you have an option. You have three options. You can do this. No, you can't. Sorry, I'll start again. You can do this, or this. Yeah, or this. Okay? And between each move, you have to do this. Okay? So you can either go with this, and I might do this, I might go over here again.
Am I mirroring you? Is that
No, the thing is, the next bit is, if we happen to do the same thing, so you can get to choose freely, we have to stop with it.
Okay.
Okay, so we do it kind of clap.
So I'm leading.
You're not leading, we're
Oh.
both, yeah. Sorry, that was a cheap joke. No. Yeah. You just choose, you're choosing, you're like, hey, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here. But between everyone you have to do this, but then if we happen to do it,
We can't like that. Okay.
So let's see what happens.
Oh, we did it again.
Oh, yeah, see, and then after a while we will. Start mirroring. Sure.
Okay, no, one more time.
Okay, we'll try again.
You guys just, talk amongst yourselves for a minute.
So after a while, because it's kind of frenzy,
Yeah.
that big thing that you do. Okay, so. Sorry.
This is just fun for everyone else.
Okay, I lost him.
Oh, there we go.
Let's try it out. Find someone, and if you don't like it, if you don't want to touch someone else's hand, hack it. Make something else. Make some other move that you do in the middle where you wave at them, or you say a word, or it's yours to play with. But trust me, you'll all be playing this with your family for the next week. So try it out. Oh, we're going
to keep doing it.
We're going to keep doing this till like. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Oh.